Hey, lifers, Dustin here, and after 10 weeks of the college football season, now the first weekend in November, we are either A, getting a better grip and understanding of what the Heisman race looks like, or B, everything is starting to fall apart and who really knows at this point. And depending on when you ask me and what we're talking about, it depends on which side of the fence I jump in on that, because it kind of feels like both are happening at the exact same time, which doesn't make any sense. So, let's go ahead and we're going to look at the bubble players that I had from last week, see how they performed. My top 10 list from last week and see how they performed. Then I will unveil the 5 players on my bubble list and the top 10 that I have for this week. Going into next week, and it is a very tenuous group, as you will see, as some are getting knocked out of the top 10 from this week, some are getting knocked out of the bubble list, and there's a lot of shifting going on. So it changes from week to week because different players are having more impact performances. Some are slipping and not showing what they probably should show in some of the bigger games of the year. So let's see what it looks like. Starting with the bubble players, Riley Ferguson of Memphis went 27 of 39 for 298 yards and 4 touchdowns. Brings his season total to 218 of 359, good for 60.7% completion percentage, 2,881 yards, 27 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, along with 3 rushing touchdowns. Ronald Jones II of USC was very impressive late Saturday night. He ran it 27 times for 194 yards and 3 touchdowns, including the game clincher, 3 receptions and 39 yards. On the season, he's ran it 159 times for 1,082 yards. That's 6.8 yards per carry, in case you're keeping track at home. 13 touchdowns, 11 receptions, 153 yards, and 1 touchdown. Rashad Penny, our old friend from San Diego State, ran it 20 times for 234 yards and 3 touchdowns, bringing his season total to 229 rushes, 1,602 yards, that's an even 7.0 yards per carry, 15 touchdowns, 17 receptions, 136 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a kickoff return for a touchdown. Malik Rozier led to a very impressive win over Virginia Tech. He was 10 of 21 for 193 yards, 2 touchdowns, did have 3 interceptions, 13 rushes for 84 yards and a touchdown. On the season, he's 153 of 273. That's only a 56% completion percentage, 2,264 yards, 19 touchdowns and 7 picks, 295 rushing yards, and 3 touchdowns. James Washington, the only wide receiver on this list, caught it 7 times for 128 yards and 1 touchdown in Bedlam. On the season, he has 52 grabs for 1,133 yards and 9 touchdowns. Now moving into the top 10 from last week, at number 10, I had Lamar Jackson, who actually had a bye week, leaving his numbers the same at 197 of 326, good for 60.4% completion percentage, 2,808 yards, 18 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 1,029 rushing yards, and 14 touchdowns. Number 9 is Khalil Tate. He went 14 of 31 for 146 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. But he was most impressive on the ground, running it 26 times for 161 yards and a touchdown in the just short loss at USC. It was actually way closer than what the final score ended up being. On the season, he's only 60 of 98, good for 61.2%, 930 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions passing. But he has ran it for 1,087 yards and 9 touchdowns, becoming the very first Pac-12 quarterback to ever rush for 1,000 yards in a season, which I found very strange. But good job, Khalil Tate. Imagine what he could have done if he'd had the reins from the very beginning of the season. Number 8 was Jonathan Taylor, who ran it 29 times for 183 yards and 1 touchdown. But that 1 touchdown was extremely impressive if you've seen the highlight. On the season, he's ran it 190 times for 1,368 yards. That's good for 7.2 yards per carry, 12 touchdowns, and then 2 receptions for 41 yards. Mason Rudolph, the other quarterback in Bedlam this weekend, went 28 of 54 for 448 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. It would be hard to beat that if it wasn't against the other quarterback that played in that game. On the season, he went 209 of 330 for 63.3% completion percentage, 3,314 yards, 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and 7 rushing touchdowns. Number 6 was Trace McSorley, who went 26 of 47 for 381 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. He also has gone 190 of 296, which is good for 64.2% completion percentage, 2,452 passing yards, 19 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, and he tacked on 305 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. And this is the part where I remind you every week that college does take out sacks from rushing totals, so a lot of these would be way higher. Number 5 is Josh Adams, who's ran it 5 times for 22 yards before exiting in the first half with an injury. It was rumored that he was undergoing concussion protocol, but Brian Kelly said afterwards he wasn't feeling right because of exams. I don't know if that was a joke that I took out of context only reading it, or if Brian Kelly thinks we're all that stupid, or what, but yeah, 22 yards. On the season, he has 137 rushes for 1,191 yards, good for 8.7 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns, 10 receptions, and 82 yards. Number 4 is Bryce Love, who had an underwhelming performance in Stanford's loss to Washington State. He only ran it 16 times for 69 yards and 1 touchdown. On the season, he's ran it 151 times for 1,456 yards, good for 9.6 yards per carry, 12 touchdowns, and 4 receptions for 19 yards. And number 3 was the Week 9 hero in Ohio State quarterback J.T. Barrett. And against Iowa, he didn't do great. He threw it 34 times, completing 18 for 208 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a very, very costly 4 interceptions. He did also run it 14 times for 63 yards. On the season, he's 189 of 280, good for 67.5% completion percentage, 2,374 yards, 28 touchdowns, 5 picks, 517 rushing yards, and 5 touchdowns. And last week, I was really kind of freaking out about whether to put Baker Mayfield or Saquon Barkley 1 or 2, but I decided on Baker at 2, and he did not disappoint in Bedlam, going 24 of 36 for 598 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 picks, also a rushing touchdown. On the season, he's 195 of 272 for 71.7% completion percentage, 3,226 yards, 28 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 181 rushing yards, and 5 touchdowns. And at number 1, I had Saquon Barkley, who in a big game against Michigan State that suffered a 3.5-hour weather delay, ran it 14 times for 63 yards, 3 receptions for 33 yards, and he did complete a pass for 20 yards. That brings his season total to 152 rushes, 864 yards, good for 5.7 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns, 39 receptions, 504 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns, and 1 passing touchdown. So now that we've assessed the players from Week 9, I'm going to unveil my Week 10 bubble players. These are going to be listed alphabetically, and they are Riley Ferguson of Memphis, Rashad Penny, Malik Rozier still. I also have Khalil Tate of Arizona. His numbers just don't really support the notion he's one of the 10 best statistic players ready for the Heisman, especially with Lamar Jackson still sitting in the top 10. He's kind of this year's Lamar Jackson, except Khalil Tate hasn't thrown the ball nearly enough to justify the numbers needed to be a dual-threat quarterback up top. He just started too late in the season, in my opinion. Brandon Wimbush, quarterback of Notre Dame, is in the same boat as far as dual threat, and we'll see what he can do in a big game against Miami this week. Now, on to the top 10. At number 10, I have the reigning champion Lamar Jackson still at number 10. Number 9, I have J.T. Barrett. It was kind of hard to believe in him. I believed in him at the beginning of the season. Then after the Oklahoma game, he showed me I probably shouldn't. Then he had a really impressive streak and then had the comeback against Penn State. I put belief in him again, and then he disappointed against Iowa. So, J.T. Barrett back at number 9. At number 8, I have Trace McSorley dropping back 2 spots. At number 7 is Ronald Jones II, making his first appearance on this list. Number 6 is Jonathan Taylor, not Thomas. Number 5, Josh Adams, even with the injury. Hopefully he can bounce back against that and have a big game and a marquee game in the Miami game. Number 4 is Mason Rudolph, who jumped up 3 spots. Number 3 is Bryce Love, who jumped up 1 spot after J.T. Barrett dropped back. And this is where I had the big question mark last week, and I will do it again this week. But I now have Saquon Barkley at number 2 and Baker Mayfield at number 1. For the last couple weeks, it felt like Saquon's trophy to lose, but during the last 2 games, both losses, both huge games in front of national audiences, they just didn't feed Saquon exactly. He just didn't get the yardage he needed, while Baker Mayfield was more than impressive over the last, really all year long, but especially last week against Oklahoma State. So there you have it, my top 10 for the Heisman Trophy for Week 10. Now it's your turn. Let me know down below in the comment section what your top 5 looks like, and I tried to think of a question of the day, but I didn't have one. Just let me know what your top 5 looks like down below in the comment section. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click the circle right there in order to subscribe or watch any of the other videos over there to the right that YouTube has suggested for you. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time. Going into next week, and it is a very tenuous group, as you will see, as some are getting knocked out of the top 10 from this week, some are getting knocked out of the bubble list, and there's a lot of shifting going on. So it changes from week to week because different... Hey, Lifers, Dustin here, and after 10 weeks of the college football season, now the first weekend in November, we are either A, getting a better grip and understanding of what the Heisman race looks like, or B, everything is starting to fall apart and who really knows at this point. And depending on when you ask me and what we're talking about, it depends on which side of the fence I jump in on that, because it kind of feels like both are happening at the exact same time, which doesn't make any sense. So let's go ahead and we're going to look at the bubble players that I had from last week, see how they performed, my top 10 list from last week, and see how they performed. Then I will unveil the 5 players on my bubble list, and the top 10 that I have for this. Players are having more impact performances. Some are slipping and not showing what they probably should show in some of the bigger games of the year. So let's see what it looks like. Starting with the bubble players, Riley Ferguson.